Hello folks, this is Alex Levich and welcome to Think Big, Start Small, Fail Fast. In other words, how to run product experiments to grow your product. Before we kick off, I want to share with you a little bit about myself. I've been in the tech industry for over 18 years. I started my career in engineering and early on moved on to product. I was really passionate and wanted to figure out how do we build and how do we bring products to market that billions and millions of people really love using and want to use every day. Since then, I worked with the top tier companies in the space, Google, Facebook, Yahoo, and even Israeli Intelligence Corps. Today, I run one of the product areas in Google Maps after spending the last 3 years at Facebook, first running their brand video monetization efforts, and later on helping companies and brands build out their customer communities. Throughout these years, I've learned quite a lot about how these companies approach building and growing successful, innovative, and sustainable products. I've developed a framework that I'd love to share with you today. And an important disclaimer is that the views presented here are solely my own and do not represent any of my current or past employers. With that, let's kick off. Very quickly, we'll chat about why we run product experiments and then talk a lot about the framework that allows us to make them more successful. Well, why do we run product experiments? I'm sure if I asked you sort of live as an audience, there will be a bunch of different ideas and all of them would be correct. But really the most important reasons are that we don't want to build what doesn't work and spend a bunch of time sort of without an impact. We want to measure potential impact and decide sort of should we be building something. And lastly, we want to optimize. Maybe we have a couple of options, a couple of approaches we could take. Which one should we go with, right? And we want to sort of test to figure out which one is best. So at the end of the day, product experiments allow us to evaluate impact and as a result, prioritize products. So with that, let's talk about the framework on how to do that better. Really, there are three components: thinking really big and envisioning sort of a big, rosy future that really matches what you're trying to do. Then breaking that down to really small pieces and going step by step. And then lastly, quickly figuring out, are you taking the right step right now? If you are, scaling it to all of your users, or declaring it as a learning step and quickly move on to the next, or come up with a new one, depending on your learnings. Let's talk more. Start from thinking big. So what does that really mean, right? Sort of like a cliche title. But really thinking big is about three things. Number one, being crystal clear on your goals and what you're trying to do. Number two, based on these goals, envisioning the best, biggest case scenarios that could happen. And number three, from that scenario and that sort of exciting future, brainstorm a bunch of different ideas. So let's talk one by one about these three. Number one, defining your goals. What does that mean? So there are different things that one could be doing in the product space. I listed three here, and there are many more. But sort of one of the bigger ones is building a new product that is seeking a product market fit. So maybe you're developing a new space. Like, for example, at some point during my career, I wanted to build a product that helped people buy homes. Nothing was built in the space, and I was trying to figure out what is the product, what is the feature that we should be building to help bring value to people, right? Another approach could be that you're actually adding features to grow adoption. When I was working on brand video monetization, we already had video on Facebook, but we wanted to make the consumption experience and the advertising experience have more features, be more attractive to our users and advertisers to get more usage, right? Lastly, there is also optimizing conversion funnel. Maybe it's a sign-up flow, or maybe it's a user experience where people do multiple steps, and you want to optimize to make sure that less and less people drop and more people make it through. So once you're clear about what you're trying to do, what type of product sort of scope you have, you should also figure out your success function. How are you going to measure success? How will you know generally that you're making progress? What is your North Star metric? Many times when you're seeking product market fit, you're actually looking for repeat usage. You're looking for engagement. People who come in and say, I liked what you offered. I'm going to come back and use it again. That's when you start thinking, oh, there is something there. I created value for my users. When you're adding features to grow adoption, well, the measurement is adoption. You have more active users. People come to you and use your product, right? And you don't necessarily look at repeat users. You're looking at active users. Now, optimizing conversion funnels, many times if it's a sign up or an entry flow, this is about new users. You will convert new users who haven't used your product to existing users. Now, of course, there are different other metrics that you could be using to measure success and many other different types of products you could be building or spaces to operate in. These are just examples, but that sort of helps you think about what I mean by these things. Envisioning the future. So it is probably the most helpful when you're trying to build 0 to 1 innovative type of products, or that would be one sort of line of thinking. But what I found that this is actually very helpful almost in anything you do, even if it's optimization and conversion. Envision a future where everything is smooth and people are doing everything you would expect them to do. What does that look like? What does that mean, right? And so to envision that future, there's a couple of questions that I ask myself to help me figure that out. One type of questions is really about people, behaviors, and problems people have today and will have in the future. Another set of questions is about other players. What are other companies in the space will be building? What are they doing now? Where are they evolving? How will the world change given what they do, right? And then the last piece, the last bucket of questions are really about you, your company, your product, your team. What are you doing really well, right? What are the assets you have? And what type of problems are you excited to solve? Answering these questions will really help you understand what are you best positioned to solve and to work on, right? As an example, Google knows how to organize information and rank it really well and bring it back to users, right? And they have these types of teams in the company. So think about that for your context. Let's very quickly try an example since there was a bunch of theoretical framework here. So here's a situation I actually faced in real life. I later on in the presentation call this example an imaginary VideoTube example, but it's actually based on a real situation I found myself in. When I was working on video at Facebook, what we were seeing is that video consumption is happening more and more on mobile. But on mobile, you don't always have sound. We also saw that people consume videos around the world, and many times these videos are in foreign languages that people don't understand. And lastly, of course, with so much content, everyone wanted to make content contextualized and relevant. So based on that, one idea you could have actually is, well, okay, let's do subtitles. On TV, when you can't have sound, and things are in different language and you still want to make it understandable and engaging, you can do subtitles, right? So that's one idea. But if you actually think bigger and think about goals, think about vision, you can actually come up with many more ideas. Here's an example. So I talked about the user problems of people not having sound and having languages they don't understand and not feeling that the video is relevant. The issue we were seeing is that people weren't engaging as much with video. They weren't watching video as much as they could have if all of these problems were solved. And so our goal was to add features to make the video consumption better. And as a result, we were expecting to see more video watch time. That was our success metric. And the vision we really put together is, well, if everything is perfect, then videos are understandable by everyone, anywhere, anytime. And then you have the best chance for engagement and high quality watch time. So if that's your goal and that's your vision, here is a bunch of different ideas you could come up with. You can do subtitles, you can play with subtitles and sound based on user environment, you can auto-translate, you can auto-dub, right? And then once you build all that, you can open an API for third parties. So sort of setting your goals and creating a big vision really helps expand your set of ideas. And then when you iterate and things don't work, you have a bunch of other ideas to try from. All right, well, now that we have a great expanded set of ideas, we can move on to starting small. And that really is about breaking things down to smaller steps, forming a roadmap of steps, and then going through that validation. Let's see. So the one thing that I found very helpful in breaking things down is really focusing on user problems. User problems are sort of exactly what it sounds like. It is problems your users experience that you're trying to solve. And if you remember how I structured the video problems I talked about, they were exactly sort of that, right? People want to watch videos on mobile, but there is no sound. But video is sight, sound, and motion, so the sound is missing. People want to watch videos in the language they understand, but not everything is available in that language, right? And people want to watch content that's relevant, right? And the first two problems sort of created an issue for the third. And so to figure out user problems, you can ask yourself a couple of questions. Number one, you just envisioned a big vision, but why isn't it a reality, right? What are the missing parts? What are the gaps? What are the problems out of that users have that we want to solve, right? We don't actually want to solve everything, all problems, and we can't really, right? Another important question is, how do we know these are real pain points? When you're thinking about sort of your vision, your user problems, brainstorming ideas, it should always be grounded in user research and your understanding that these are real problems you didn't just make up. These are problems people around the world in your target segment experience. And then lastly, once you understand the problem, you know, much easier to figure out how do you know when you solved it, right? Once I understood the problem was there was no sound in video, and thus people didn't understand the video, and thus they didn't watch it. I knew that once I solve the problems, I should see people watching more video. All right, from these user problems, you basically form a roadmap. It's literally like blocks. You organize them in a way that makes sense, that allows you to sort of go from the biggest, most foundational, most important one to ones that sort of build on top of it. And it's a little bit of a tricky process where you have to sort of like build more and more value along the way, and prioritization and sequencing is super important, and you're never going to solve everything at once. It's going to be an iterative process. And in fact, these user problems, or rather the solution to these user problems, are going to be your experiments. And by following this framework, sort of organizing experiments as solutions to prioritize and sequence user problems, that's the best way to grow your products, whether it's from scratch or from 100. So cool. All right. So when we are creating these experiments, we are effectively validating solutions that we came up with, our ideas that we had before, to user problems that we identified. And there are a couple of things that is important to keep in mind when you're doing that. First of all, remember the starting small. Build the smallest solution you can, the minimal viable product, the smallest solution that solves your user problem, right? And always dog food. So that's one piece. The second is really about listening. All the time you need to be looking at data. You should be using your product yourself. You should have all of your team, all of your company ideally using your product, which is called dog fooding your product. And that's what we typically do at Google and at Facebook. And so that's one type of data you're getting that you're really sort of processing. Another type of data is what your real users outside are doing, right? Like always do qualitative and quantitative user research to understand how people are using your solutions. Talk to your customers. The qualitative user research, right? Really understand what they're saying. Another important aspect is really to understand what you should be building, what you should not, right? Remember, you're building the minimal solution that solves your user problem. Don't build anything else. Don't build a solution to another user problem. Only build that, focus, and then figure out, does this work? Is this the right solution? And you can move on to the next block on your roadmap or not. And of course, being crisp on your goals. We talked about the beauty of user problems, that it allows you to crisply understand what was the goal. How are you going to know that you solve this problem, right? That's what being crisp on your goals is about. All right, let's see. Now we get to the next stage, scaling or failing fast. And this process or this stage is really sort of about iteration, about figuring out how do you learn from everything and where do you move? Do you move to the next user problem? Do you iterate on the existing one? Do you do something completely different because there is a black swan event in the world like COVID? So let's see. Oh, okay. All right. Let's move my video down now, or maybe right here. So you're probably wondering why fail fast is part of the framework. Well, none of us want to fail, right? Definitely. This whole idea of this whole presentation is for you to be successful, right? But the truth is, what I found is that there is no success without failure. And failure is just about learning and iteration, right? It's part of the process. To be honest, if you haven't failed, you probably didn't aim high enough, right? If you've never run an experiment that didn't work, there's something off about it. Every product manager along their career, along their path, will have things that really succeeded and things that didn't work as well, right? It's just part of the process. Now, the key about failing is really about the speed and the amount of learning that you're doing. And really what I mean by failing is, let's imagine that you are solving user problem number one, you have the solution you identified, you know how to measure success, you built it, you built your minimum viable product, testing it, you look at the results, no video watch time, right? This does not increase video watch time by a lot, right? Going back to our example. Well, in that case, you know that your solution, right, or maybe even your problem were not right, right? And you have to really spend time and effort and focus to really understand why. Was it the solution that needs to be iterated on? Is it not the right solution at all? Is it the user problem that you perhaps didn't validate enough or didn't understand enough? Or what is it that you felt like drove the lack of impact that you've seen, right? And then decide to either iterate on this particular solution or this problem or move on. See, hold on. Cool. And your best, and let me move my video again. And as probably like you guys can imagine, data is your best friend in that process. To be able to really fail with speed and maximum amount of learning and then succeed after that, all of it is about data. And by data, I don't mean just the CTR or clicks of your users or flows and stuff like that. Really, it's the broader set of things that give you information about the why, right? You've set goals, right, based on your user problem, your users' behaviors, and now you're trying to validate. You have to, again, like sort of really understand the qualitative and quantitative aspect of what took place. That means looking at the data of how users went through your different experiences and funnels and pages. Where did they click and how and why? And also even maybe doing interviews with users, right? Or surveys or whatever it is, or field studies to really understand what people do and what they say about their motivation. I found that combination of qualitative and quantitative is really sort of the golden path to understanding your users and figuring out what makes sense. Now, an important piece of this is that you shouldn't just invest in learning when you fail. You actually should invest just as much in learning when you succeed. Because once you understand why you succeeded, it will allow you to succeed again and again, and maybe even prevent some failures. Although, again, failure is part of the process, which is totally okay. And to be honest, like in my life or my career, I've actually learned much more from failures than from successes. But remember how important it is to really understand why something worked or didn't. All right. Well, let's go through an example. So let's remind ourselves of our vision. Again, we wanted to make videos understandable by everyone, anywhere, anytime. Sort of very nice, very ambitious vision. The user problems were that people didn't understand videos without sound, and they don't have sound when they're on mobile. It was to sort of like point your attention. This is actually a subset of the user problems we discussed before, and that's okay, right? Like we can actually always focus on a particular prioritized subset of the user problems. We're never going to solve everything. And so let's go through what actually happened. I validated the problem with user research. Indeed, like on the go, people sort of don't have sound, so the video you just don't connect with it as much. You don't understand what it's about, right? And when you're on the go, like you can't really have sound all the time, just sometimes. And we talked about the goal that once these problems are solved, people will start engaging with the video and they will actually watch more videos. So there will be more mobile video watch time. A solution. So in my particular case, one of the ideas that I started with was actually auto-generating subtitles for videos. So you would upload a video and it would be sort of like have a prompt and say, hey, would you like to attach subtitles? And it would automatically generate the subtitles and the user could accept or not accept that. And so when we experimented with it, actually what we found is that there wasn't a high rate of acceptance of the subtitles. And it turned out that in that particular case, users were advertisers and they needed someone else to actually review the subtitles because it was part of the creative of the video. And so we had to actually build different flows that allow people to easily share the subtitles and sort of approve them. And so we found that out really by talking to people, understanding like why are they not finding this helpful, right? Because we sort of had this vision that these subtitles would be really awesome, and users sort of would understand the videos more and watch them more. And so we found a new pain point, which was basically the person uploading the video wasn't the one who was allowed to sort of like attach the subtitles. And so we solved for that. Well, and now it's time for wrap up. So we tried to make this short and sweet. It's hard to do digital conferences. So really, when you're running your product experiments to grow your product, split it into 3 stages. Really, first, think big. Define crisp goals. Envision a really big future. And then brainstorm a bunch of ideas. Ask yourself, how can the world be completely different, completely better, and all problems could be solved, right? Like, what are the different ideas of how we can get to that amazing future? Then take all of these amazing ideas and this big, awesome future and break it down to the problems you are trying to solve. And of course, be sure, or rather like do your best effort on making sure these problems are validated, that they're real ones for your real users. So break it down to a set of user problems, and then organize these in a user roadmap by really prioritizing what you think is the biggest or the most foundational problem, and then sequence the rest. And try to do this in a way where you assume all of these will be successful and you build more and more value along the way. So this roadmap is not going to be static. It's going to be to change depending on each experiment you run on a particular user problem. But that's okay. This is your first draft, and depending on the learning you make throughout this process, you're going to evolve it. That's how it should be, right? And then basically your solutions to these experiments are your way to validate these ideas, right? You're running experiments in order to validate this works, this makes sense, this has an impact. I should basically see if this is a successful experiment, and if so, scale it to all of my users, or if not, to really understand why that didn't take place, why the impact wasn't observed, and either iterate on that particular solution or adjust the user problem or move on to the next one, right? And remember, whatever outcome you get, it's a learning. You succeeded, great, learn from that, right? You didn't succeed, also great. That learning is going to give you your next step that's going to be much more successful. And it's an iterative process, right? You can be iterating on, honestly, any of the above. And you go sort of and iterate on the whole process, even sometimes with the same product, the same feature, etc. Let's see. Thank you guys for your attention. Hopefully this was short and sweet and clear, but I'd love your feedback. So here is a Think Big feedback link. Would be awesome to have you guys sort of go there and share some thoughts with me. I'd love to see how I can make this presentation more helpful, or if you want to suggest other topics that you'd be interested in sort of learning about from a Google and Facebook PM, I'd love to know about that as well. So any feedback goes. Thank you so much and have a great day.